This week on The Perfect Scam.
I'm not.
Well, why don't you answer my calls? I don't care if your wife is at the hospital. To be honest with you, I don't give a damn. But you know why I do give a damn? It's your money, and my name is written all over it. Do you understand?
Yes.
I'm frustrated now.
Welcome back to The Perfect Scam. I'm your host, Bob Sullivan. A scam so powerful, so profitable, that a Mexican cartel is switching from drug sales to call centers. So dangerous that dead bodies were recently found outside one of those call centers. And so easy that millions of Americans could be targeted in their homes from thousands of miles away. All because at one point, they fell in love with a vacation spot. Roughly 10 million Americans own a timeshare. Many of them wish they didn't. The fees are high, the credits go unused. But escaping timeshare contracts can be very frustrating, much harder than consumers think. And that frustration is an opening for these ruthless criminals. Today's special report on the cartel connection to timeshare fraud is so important, we're bringing it to you over 2 episodes. As you'll hear, for this story, we had remarkable access to audio recordings of criminals in action, a rare opportunity to hear what a scam really sounds like in real time. Today, we begin with James, a veteran who thought he'd found a way to unload an unwanted timeshare, but instead found his way into the middle of a Mexican crime gang. You can probably understand why James insists we only use his first name.
I worked in law enforcement for 33 years. And,
33 years, wow.
Yeah, and I also served in reserve components of the Army for about that same amount of time. Actually, I was on active duty during the Vietnam era and deployed to Southeast Asia with the Army. And then when I got out of the Army off active duty, I went into the reserve components and spent the remainder of that time with the reserve components.
I so admire that you still continue to serve. Why?
It's almost a calling. My father was a career in the Army and Army Air Corps and transitioned into the Air Force when the Air Force came about. And, it just had a history that I relied on, and I'm cut from very patriotic cloth, I guess you might say.
When James comes back from Southeast Asia, he and his wife settle on the West Coast. And after years of hard work, they go on a vacation to Lake Tahoe and, well, they decide it's a place they'd love to come back to again and again. So, back in 1996, they invest in a timeshare there. Love Lake Tahoe. It's amazing there.
Yeah.
So you would go every other year or so?
We had a biannual or every other year membership. And we only went to that particular location once or twice during the entire time we own it. In fact, we still own it. But we generally used the points, I guess, or the ownership, and we traded and went to other locations, traveled to Mexico and so on.
So what was it about Lake Tahoe that got you, involved in the first place?
Well, it was one of those kind of free things you go to, and so we decided, we'll give it a shot.
Do you remember how much you spent on it?
It was about $8,900 and change, thereabouts.
No, I do remember the pitches back then very well, right? $8,000 or $9,000 for vacations forever. It doesn't sound so bad at all.
There you go. Yep. That was what I would consider the early days of the timeshare boom, you might say.
In fact, during the next couple of years, they buy into a couple of other timeshares too. But even with the potential to use that Lake Tahoe right to vacation in other spots, well, as the years go by, they just aren't using it. And a call from out of the blue comes that seems to arrive at the perfect time.
Well, I got a phone call back in very early October of 2022 from an individual operating a company, and his name was Michael. Michael queried us as to whether or not we might be interested in purchasing a timeshare, and I advised no, that we already had timeshares. We weren't interested in purchasing anything. And so that's when he made the offer. He says, well, are you interested in getting rid of any of them? This one in the Tahoe area, being biennial, was one that we had actually kind of not been using. So he said, if I could sell that for you and make a few bucks on it, would you be interested? I said, well, yeah, sure. We're not using it, so we may as well get something out of it.
Michael seems cheerful and competent, and, well, why wouldn't they consider his offer?
I'd say his voice, I would say at around 30-ish. I'd say 25 to maybe 30, no more than 35, but something like that, somewhere around in there.
And could you place where he was from?
No. Normally I'm pretty good about picking up on accents, but this was a little bit difficult to pick up on. But he was a very fast talker.
And my word, believe me, is as strong as it comes. And honestly, I'm working my hardest. I'm running that extra mile for your transaction.
Within a week, Michael calls back with good news.
Says, hey, I've got a buyer. The buyer is a Mexican national, and he's offering $22,470 for your timeshare up at Tahoe. Well, that's a little over double what we had paid for it. So my wife and I said, well, why not? We'll give it a shot. He sent the paperwork. We received email copies of a contract from a escrow company, a commercial escrow company, actually, out of New York City. Everything looked reasonable.
Thrilled at their good fortune, they sign the contract and they send it back to Michael. But there is just one hitch.
A few days later, Michael called back and advised everything was looking good, except we had a fee that was attached to the transfer of the property to the Mexican owner and the transfer of the funds from Mexico through the escrow company and into my account. And that fee, Michael advised, was $2,696 that we as the sellers had to pay in order to facilitate this cross-border transfer of funds.
That's a lot. That's 10% of what they were going to pay you, right?
Exactly. And at that time, Michael advised that the buyer, the Mexican national, was a wealthy investment type and that he would reimburse those funds.
So James logs onto that New York escrow website and sees the $2,696 has already been deposited there. And so he goes ahead and pays via wire transfer for that amount. He's told the sale will go through and he'll get his $22,000 within days and never have to think about that timeshare and those maintenance fees again. But a few days later, there is another call.
Michael called back and advised that, oh, by the way, there is another amount that needs to be paid in order to affect the transfer. And I said, well, how much is that? And he advised it's $3,595 and change. And I said, well, this thing's starting to cost me. And he said, don't worry, the buyer in Mexico is going to reimburse your account. So at that point, I was a little bit concerned, obviously, but the funds showed up as being reimbursed on the escrow account from the commercial escrow company in New York. So I said, all right.
You logged into the website again and you saw that the money had been credited. Yeah.
Yep. It's in the escrow account with the company in New York.
There it is, uscommercialescrowcorp.com. I'm looking at it right now. The website says there's an address right on West 35th Street in New York City. There's a 646 area code, phone number atop the page. That's a Manhattan area code. It says we're, quote, reinventing the closing process right on top of the page. So, after James logs onto his account and he sees the deposits credited to escrow, he feels comfortable making that second payment. Again, he believes that his payment will arrive within a few days, and it will help put all this behind him. But instead, another call comes from someone new.
I get a call from an individual identifying himself as Jesus, and he's a representative of, let's see if I got his, Director of General Finance, International Finances at Banco de Mexico. So that's the head director of foreign accounts, supposedly, at Bank of Mexico. He calls and explains that there's this $16,155 fee for erase of records, insurance, and notary fees.
Another fee? This time for $16,000? But Jesus says the same thing. Make this one last payment, which will be refunded, and James will get all his money. The holdup is so disappointing, but hardly the biggest thing on James' mind at the time because he's recently received some very bad news. His wife is sick. She has cancer and she must begin treatment right away. There's a lot going on at home. So James is distracted, and after he sends in another wire for the $16,000 that Jesus demanded, well, then there's another call about a cross-border registration fee for $22,000. And then there's an insurance fee for $18,000. At this point, James begins to ask questions and doesn't pay right away. Jesus does not like that. In this clip of a phone call recorded by James and supplied to the Perfect Scam, Jesus is asking for a total of $78,000 to be paid immediately.
Yeah, I've had some, my wife's had some issues going on. I'm with her right now.
I feel that you're ignoring my calls.
Yesterday, I had some issues with my phone, and today I'm at the doctor's office with my wife.
I'm going to be blunt with you, okay? I've done nothing but protect and gain capital for you. I feel like you're not valuing my efforts in a sort of way. And the day before yesterday I've been trying to reach you because we had a deadline for the 78. I needed a verbal explanation and a verbal legal intent on your end.
Weeks go by and the calls keep coming from Michael and Jesus. Eventually, James pays the outstanding fees. And again, he's told the refund and his $22,000 payment will arrive almost immediately after he pays the fees. But then there's another snafu having to do with the Mexican government. James can see the balance at that escrow website growing, but James' wife isn't so sure about the whole thing.
She knows when these funds are going out, and by about the second set of funds that go out, she says, I don't want any part of this. So she's like, we're done. And it was me. I made the decision to continue with this based primarily on the fact that this commercial escrow company out of New York City had the funds. The escrow accounts got my wife and my name on it, and everything looks up and up on that particular account. So I'm relying on the fact that we've got the seller representative, Michael, representing me supposedly. We have a escrow company out of New York City, and then we have the Bank of Mexico representative involved. And my thoughts were that this escrow company looks legit online.
For the next few months, about every 2 weeks or so, instead of getting a check, James gets another phone call about another delay. Here's Michael telling James he's also frustrated by the holdup.
I don't know how your operation was, but it's definitely going to get better. And that's
right
that's
now,
the goal. That's the goal here. Okay, that's the goal here.
Well,
believe me, I want to feel secure. I want you to feel secure. I want to feel happy getting home from work, at least knowing that we're able to do something positive and achieve something. But hey, every day I don't even want to go straight home. I'll tell you the truth. I spend hours, driving around sometimes. Sometimes I go to the lake. Sometimes I go to conventions just to kill time. My wife, she's always questioning me, hey, what time are you coming home? Hey, why are you getting out this late? I just feel so stressed out. Things aren't the same with my family.
Okay.
But I'm trying my best, James.
Jesus, on the other hand, is much pushier. Here he is, demanding a large payment from James, chastising him for missing deadlines.
I'll see what I can come up with. It's still, is it 70, the amount 78,000, or did it go back?
That no longer, forget about that. That no longer applies. I kept calling you yesterday and before yesterday. I told you. It's the full amount. I'm sorry.
All right. I'll see what I can come up with.
Well, I need you to executively let me know Monday morning if I'm going to close the account or if I'm going to send you the security deposit account for you to deposit the security deposit in the United States that week.
Okay. I think Michael mentioned something about that in the phone call that I had with him too. It was about
Don't forget, and I hate the fact that you forget. I hate it. Don't forget there's time frames. Then all of a sudden, Jesus calls you and there's a bad news. Well, stop breaching the deadlines. But anyways, who am I to convince you, right?
James is frustrated, distracted, and worried sick about his wife. And Michael, increasingly, offers empathy. He even offers to help persuade James' wife that everything will work out if James just makes one more payment.
Look, I'm on your side, so if she's gonna get upset on me, if she's gonna yell at me, if she's not gonna believe me, look, I understand, but I'm still going to make sure that I can do everything I can on both of your behalves, okay? To make sure that you and her can be having your life back to normal, before this all started.
Well, I'll see what I can do.
The escrow account now shows James has hundreds of thousands of dollars tied up in this transaction, but he still hasn't received a dime. When James tells Michael he's losing sleep over that, Michael says,
Oh, man.
I can hardly get any sleep, James. I can hardly
Well,
get any sleep. Believe me, I'm trying my best. I'm trying my best. I'm not giving up on you. I'm making sure that you can get all your funds. And hey, I promise both of our situations are going to change. And hey, look, if we can resolve this month before the month ends, I'll promise that I'll catch I'll book a flight. I'll have my wife meet up with you and your wife. And I want my wife to speak to your wife with their points of views. And conversate in front of us. What they thought.
And then Michael tells James he's going to do something drastic. He's going to Mexico himself to fix things.
Late last year, Michael advised that he was going to go to Mexico and meet with Jesus to get all of this straightened out. He called from Mexico advising me that he ended up having to pay some penalties and the like, significant amount out of his own pocket because they thought he was involved in some supposedly money laundering scam thing that I and he were involved in.
But that trip, Michael says, does the trick. James' TimeShare sale is finally going through, and the payment is on the way. And did you feel a sense of relief when they said, hey, money's finally coming?
Absolutely. You bet. Yeah, I figured, hey, this whole thing's over. We're going to be getting the funds. And now I'm going to just be waiting for the UPS to deliver the documents to transfer the property to the Mexican buyer. But we waited about a week. I checked the escrow account and the funds are back in the escrow account. and they are not in my account.
But the money doesn't come. Instead, there are more fees. James' frustration mounts, but he's got no good options. If he decides to drop the whole thing and cut his losses, well, Michael and Jesus tell him that will cost $400,000, and the process could take months.
If there was some way any funds could be delivered to my account regarding this, anything, it could be delivered, a deposit into my account somehow or other, and my wife saw money come in from this thing, from your company or, something. Because right now, nothing has ever come in,
I know. Yeah.
Nothing.
Believe me, I'm conscious of that. I'm conscious very much about that. But that's what I want to change. And again, we're in a situation where, look, they've told me in the past, hey, this was it. We paid it, you paid it. We processed it. I was informed of it occurring. And what happened? Hey, this came up. And then what happened? You paid it again. You got to reimburse. Went into the account. We move forward. Same thing. So I understand. We're in a situation right now that maybe you don't even believe my word, but hey, this is all I have here, James. And my word, believe me, is as strong as it comes. And honestly, I'm working my hardest. I'm running that extra mile for your transaction. I'm not giving up so easy, because other brokers, I can guarantee, this is so stressful, and I do have a job so difficult where it's stressful enough with situations like this, and I just can't give up. I just can't give up.
All right.
It's the total opposite. But I'll speak to you tomorrow.
But it seems tomorrow never comes. Instead, the owner of the timeshare transaction company, a man named Bruce, now gets involved. Involved to the extent that he ends up trapped in Mexico.
That would have been in probably January, late January. The owner went to Mexico, and after Michael went there, Michael came back after having supposedly paid $72,000 or so to allow himself to get back to the United States because of some inconsistencies or inappropriate payments that they had made on my behalf, supposedly, to get these funds cleared. Both him and Bruce were involved in a similar situation like that. Bruce kept calling from Mexico through the month of December when he was down there, saying that I had to, in order to get those funds released and in order to get him able to travel back to the United States, there was a fee of $156,000 that had to be paid.
He wanted you to pay $150,000 so he could come home.
Right. And
wow.
that would clear up everything.
But James, at this point, is really having some doubts, and he doesn't know what to do.
That's when number one, I didn't have the money. I'd have had to take a mortgage out of my house, or second mortgage out on my house, in order to come up with those kind of funds. But at that point, both Michael and Bruce were begging me to do that. Michael was the guy, oh no, figure out a way to do it without putting a mortgage on your house. I don't want you to do that. He's my guy, remember. He's now put himself in he's representing me. He's doing everything, watching out for me.
James doesn't take out a second mortgage on his home, but what he does do is a lot more reading.
And at that point, it finally got to the point where I started doing my research with the domain names and what have you, and discovered that the domain name of the timeshare resale company didn't match up. The emails that I had used had changed slightly. I could still get in touch with them with emails, but their address had changed just a bit.
The discrepancies are enough to make James tell Michael he's not paying this time. When you said no to Michael, what happened?
At that point, he says, please, I'm begging you, help. If you can come up with those funds. I throw him along and I says, hey, I'll see what I can do, but right now I don't have the money, and I'm not going to take out a second mortgage on my house. That went on for a bit, but Bruce also called me from Mexico, had a Mexican phone number, begging me the same thing so that he could get back home. And Bruce, at this point, was he's the owner of the company supposedly, and he said that he would gladly pay me out of his company funds if I could pay this 157 or so thousand that was required in order to facilitate the conclusion of this supposed transaction, which would also allow him to come back to the United States, because he was supposedly being held under house arrest, so to speak, on some charge in Mexico.
Wow. Jesus, meanwhile, well, he's not as polite about things. In fact, he begins to engage in outright badgering, threatening James.
You could get the best lawyer you want. You could get whoever you want. And this is not a threat. This is facts. I am the head director of foreign accounts in dealing with Miss Maria Elizabeth Hernandez in Bank of Mexico. The Financial Intelligence Unit is my job. My name is protected because of the fact that the Mexican cartels threaten our lives on a daily basis because we close their accounts. We seize their money. We hit them where it hurts. Now, you're going to tell me that everything I'm doing, there's no value for it? You're not valuing my efforts?
Even to the point of flat-out heartlessness.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying
Well, why don't you answer my calls? I don't care if your wife is at the hospital. To be honest with you, I don't give a damn. But you know why I do give a damn? It's your money, and my name is written all over it. Do you understand?
Yes.
I'm frustrated now because it's like every department's on my ass saying, hey, what's going on? The conversion is going up. The conversion is going down. The Mexican peso dollar, the value is up and it goes down. And then what I got to tell you? You got to pay the updated spin because the dollar went down. Or you got to pay the spin because the dollar went up. Do you understand?
I'm beginning to, yes.
Well, just begin to, please. This is not a game.
No, it's not a game. That escrow website now shows James has spent nearly $900,000 toward these transactions. He's basically out of money. And you might say he follows Jesus' advice. He decides to contact a lawyer. That lawyer is Mike Finn, who has a law practice which deals almost entirely with getting people out of timeshare commitments.
I don't know. James contacted our office. I didn't take the initial call. It came in through our intake, and they were confused about what James was calling about.
But Mike isn't confused. He knows what's going on right away. He gets calls from timeshare sale fraud victims every week. James is one of hundreds, probably thousands, of timeshare owners who've been caught up in an incredibly complex and efficient scam.
Oh my goodness, it's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. James, over a period of time, sent wire transfers to a place that maybe now can't be traced. Wire transfers totaling close to $900,000 for a timeshare sales price of somewhere in the market of $33,000.
Mike Finn tells James to stop talking to Jesus and Bruce and Michael, to end all connection with the escrow company, with all of it. James doesn't know what to do. He just wants a lawyer's help to get his money back. And at this point, he has no idea what he's gotten himself in the middle of. But Steve Fisher knows. He's an investigative journalist based in Mexico City. He moved years ago from Pennsylvania to Mexico to investigate organized crime. A very dangerous job. And at about the same time that James is talking with this lawyer, Steve is independently working on a long story about all these timeshare frauds for USA Today. What's behind this rash of cases that people like Mike Finn are seeing? And the truth is so much darker than Mike or James can imagine. Here's what Steve learns as he's reporting on his story. We often imagine scam criminals sitting in dark, smoke-filled basement rooms, working by themselves or in small groups, desperately scrambling to steal a few dollars here and there. Well, timeshare scams, kind of used to work like that until.
And then in 2010, something very important happened. An individual who had very close ties to the Jalisco cartel, the new generation Jalisco cartel, one of the most violent cartels in Mexico, if not in the world, said that this individual who knew the cartel said, look, there's this incredible business where you can make extraordinary amounts of money with very little overhead. And it's this scam. And there's a number of call centers in Puerto Vallarta that you can take over. And he's like, and I'll teach you how to do this. And so this violent cartel basically took over call centers, either forcing people to work for them or threatening them until they, agreed to work with them. Of course, like I said, forcing them to work with that. And the Jalisco cartel took over this business in Puerto Vallarta in 2010 and began to perfect it to a level of incredible sophistication. And so according to the US government, they're now making hundreds of millions of dollars, but it all started them taking over little mom and pop call centers back in 2010.
So is this what I imagine in my head? There's a small boiler room and gang members just bust in one day with obvious weapons on them and say, you're working for us now? Is that how it works?
Yeah, I can't speak particularly to the boiler room part, but that's what it was. It was just people, mom and pop sort of businesses doing their own thing, like I said, fugitives of the law and expats scamming senior citizens on their own. And what the Jalisco cartel did was just take it, formalize it all, and create enormous streams of income for the cartel.
So Steve doesn't know James, but he's interviewed other victims, and he knows the scam very well. People like Jesus and Michael and Bruce, they aren't representing a timeshare buyer. They don't work for a financial company. They work for what's known as the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. And stealing money from American timeshare owners is big business for the violent gang. Such big business that the cartel has dramatically shifted business models in recent years.
Well, the return on investment, Bob, is actually, according to U.S. government officials, better than drug trafficking. Because if you think about it, let's say the Jalisco cartel is getting a shipment of cocaine from Colombia and needs to get it all the way into the United States. The amount of investment along that route to bribe officials, basically just defend that shipment from its origins to the United States, is an extraordinary amount of investment. It requires a lot of logistics, a lot of people to get that shipment to its destination.
So instead of working with street dealers and bribery and secret shipping arrangements, the cartel hires office workers who fill up call centers that target U.S. timeshare owners looking to unload their vacation homes.
When you're talking about these call center scam centers, you have a few people that make some phone calls, convince people to give their money, to the cartel, which of course they don't mention that it's a cartel. I mean, it's basically creating a few front companies, shell companies, LLCs, if you will. And that's pretty much the extent of their investment. They pay, U.S. government officials told me that they pay, low-level call center employees about $700 a month. And then the top-tier closing group, as they call them, they get a percentage of the cut of the scam that they are part of. So the investment is far less than getting a kilo of cocaine into the United States, and the risk is infinitely lower.
The men James has been talking to work in a very dangerous business.
So if anyone care to go up against the Jalisco cartel, they would quickly come up against semi-automatic weapons, 50 caliber machine guns, and perhaps think twice about confronting them.
And in fact, there were several bodies found outside a call center not very long ago, right?
Yeah, that's right. And officials aren't totally certain what happened or why, but there are some Theories are that these call center employees perhaps were staging a revolt, trying to leave their jobs, and the cartel just very quickly, easily, and efficiently made an example of them by leaving their body parts in 48 bags outside of the city. Again, it's always difficult to determine what happens. It's hard to get to the bottom of a crime in Mexico, and certainly with this one, that is the case. But the theories kind of align with how the Jalisco cartel functions in general. They're good at making high-profile, gruesome examples of those who would defy them.
Gruesome examples of those who would defy them. That's chilling. But James doesn't know any of this at the moment, and he's not sure what to believe. The lawyer wants him to cut off Jesus and Michael, all of them, but James isn't ready to do that yet. He's still holding out hope that he can get his money out of that escrow company. Right then, Mike is contacted by New York Times reporter Maria Abi Habib, who, like Steve Fisher, is looking into the TimeShare scam Mexican drug cartel connection. Maria, calling from Mexico, asks this TimeShare lawyer for help finding victims of the TimeShare scam. That's how Maria connects with James. She interviews James for her story and podcast. And even after she interviews him, when I listened to the New York Times version of your story, the reporter there seemed to suggest that when she first spoke to you, you weren't completely convinced that this was a fraud.
At that point, correct. And primarily because of this escrow account that I still had. The escrow account still reflects that there's money in my supposed account there.
What happens to James' $900,000? How did a dangerous, very dangerous, Mexican drug cartel end up so deeply involved in the U.S. timeshare industry? And what can timeshare owners do to protect themselves when trying to get out from under a timeshare deal? Well, that's next week on The Perfect Scam. For The Perfect Scam, I'm Bob Sullivan. If you have been targeted by a scam or fraud, you are not alone. Call the AARP Fraud Watch Network helpline at 877-908-3360. Their trained fraud specialists can provide you with free support and guidance on what to do next.
Our email address at The Perfect Scam is theperfectscampodcast@aarp.org, and we want to hear from you. If you've been the victim of a scam or you know someone who has, and you'd like us to tell their story, write to us. That address again is theperfectscampodcast@aarp.org. Thank you to our team of Scam Busters, Associate Producer Annalee Embry, Researcher Becky Dodson, Executive Producer Julie Getz, and our audio engineer and sound designer Julio Gonzalez. Be sure to find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. For AARP's The Perfect Scam, I'm Bob Sullivan.